Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going to kind of take a look into the making of David Koresh,
Oh, wow.
the enigmatic figure at the
Yes.
heart of the 1993 Waco siege.
Right.
And our guide for this is going to be an episode of the American Scandal podcast,
Okay.
which really details the path that led Vernon Howell, a
Mm.
seemingly ordinary Texan,
Yeah.
to transform into the self-proclaimed Messiah, David Koresh.
It's wild.
At the end of this deep dive, hopefully you'll understand how all this happened.
It's a story that unfolds like a psychological thriller.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Where faith and power and isolation all intertwine to create a truly compelling narrative.
So let's unpack this, starting with Vernon Howell's childhood.
Okay.
And we're not talking about just like typical childhood struggles here. I mean,
Right.
imagine a young boy in 1960s Texas, abandoned by his father, raised by a single mother,
Wow.
and facing abuse from a stepfather.
Oh, that's awful.
And then add to that the
Yeah.
challenges of learning disabilities and relentless bullying. And you can begin to see how Vernon sought refuge and meaning in the world of religion.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting how he didn't just passively absorb religion, you know?
Oh, really?
He fully immersed himself in his grandmother's Seventh-day Adventist church,
Wow.
memorizing scripture with like this almost obsessive zeal.
Wow.
It's as if he was searching for a code,
Yeah.
some kind of like a hidden language within those verses that would like unlock some sense of purpose and belonging.
So you're saying that these early experiences, this sense of being an outsider, fueled his later need for control and his desire to lead.
Potentially, yeah.
How fascinating.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
So Vernon grows up, heads to the Texas oil fields, even falls in love and experiences heartbreak.
A normal life.
Yeah, a normal but challenging life
Yeah.
trajectory. But then something extraordinary happens.
Yeah, the late 1970s are a pivotal point in Vernon's life.
Okay.
He's like wrestling with these feelings of being lost,
Yeah.
questioning his place in the world. Yeah.
Then one night, lying under a vast Texas sky, he has this like profound spiritual experience.
Wow.
He describes feeling God's presence and receiving not just forgiveness, but like a specific mission
Really?
to reveal hidden biblical truths.
It's like a scene out of a movie.
I know.
Like this divine revelation,
Well-
this experience seems to just obliterate any lingering doubts and solidifies his commitment to this path guided by unwavering faith.
Yeah, and this is really where we see the seeds of what will become the Branch Davidians' ideology taking root.
Okay, interesting.
This group, rooted in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition, they believed in the imminent second coming of Christ
Oh, wow.
and the establishment of a divine kingdom on earth.
So Vernon's newfound conviction aligned perfectly with this apocalyptic worldview,
Totally.
setting the stage for his attraction to Mount Carmel.
Yes. Mount Carmel, the Branch Davidians community near Waco, became like Vernon's next destination.
Oh, okay.
Drawn by rumors of this female prophet, Lois Roden,
Okay.
he arrives seeking guidance and a deeper connection to his faith.
So he finds this community teeming with spiritual fervor and simmering internal conflict.
Right. Wow. It's important to keep in mind that this community lived a life very much apart from like mainstream society.
Okay.
They practiced communal living, adhered to strict dietary rules,
Really?
and intensely studied biblical prophecy,
Interesting.
especially the book of Revelation,
Mhm.
which spoke of a final battle between good and evil.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
It was within this context that Vernon, a young man already primed for a life of profound religious purpose, found himself drawn to Lois Roden,
Okay.
a figure revered for her spiritual insights and leadership within the community.
But it wasn't exactly a smooth entry, right?
No.
Louis Roden's estranged son, George, had his own designs on leadership,
Exactly.
and he wasn't too keen on Vernon's arrival.
George Roden was a volatile and unpredictable figure.
Oh, really?
Yeah, prone to violent outbursts and harboring this like deep resentment towards anyone he perceived as a threat to his authority. His presence added a layer of tension and danger to the already charged atmosphere of Mount Carmel.
Oh, gosh. So you're saying Vernon is navigating this complex social landscape, eager to contribute to prove himself.
Right.
And he even begins to develop his own sermons.
Yes, but Lois, wary of George's explosive nature,
Mm-hmm.
advises him to wait,
Oh, wow.
creating a sense of anticipation and this like simmering power struggle within the community.
It's like a powder keg
Yeah,
waiting to explode.
totally.
Wow.
And, you know, it's important to understand that Vernon's relationship with Lois went beyond just like mentorship.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they developed a romantic relationship,
Wow.
fueled by Vernon's interpretation of biblical prophecy
Okay.
and this belief that they were destined to conceive a son who would play a significant role in the coming apocalypse.
This just added another layer of complexity to the dynamics at Mount Carmel
Absolutely.
and further alienated George.
Right, we saw Vernon as a rival for his mother's affection and the leadership of the community.
So we've got this really volatile mix of personalities and prophetic expectations
Right.
brewing at Mount Carmel,
Yeah.
and it wasn't long before things boiled over.
The tension finally erupted during one of George Roden's sermons.
Oh, wow.
He just launched into this tirade against Vernon, spewing accusations and insults. Like, his words were just dripping with venom.
Really?
But it wasn't just like a war of words. You know?
Yeah.
George, in a fit of rage, physically attacked one of Vernon's supporters,
Oh, God.
turning the sermon into a scene of just chaos and fear.
It's hard to fathom the intensity of that moment.
I know, right?
The clash of personalities, the fear rippling through the community,
Yeah.
and Vernon reacting not with aggression, but with
Right.
this almost unsettling calmness.
This incident was a turning point.
Yeah.
Vernon's supporters, witnessing his composure under, like, duress,
Mhm.
they rallied to his defense,
Wow.
physically shielding him from George's rage.
So this act of loyalty solidified the bonds between Vernon and his followers and drew a stark contrast between his leadership style and George's volatile nature.
Exactly.
So it seems like this violent outburst backfired on George,
Yeah.
pushing even more people towards Vernon's camp.
Aye.
But the situation was clearly untenable.
To avoid further conflict and potential bloodshed,
Mm.
Vernon and his followers decided to leave Mount Carmel.
It was a strategic retreat.
Yeah, but it also marked a significant shift in the power dynamics.
Okay.
Vernon, though physically separated from the community, had emerged as a leader in his own right,
Yeah.
commanding the loyalty of a growing faction within the Branch Davidians.
This separation also coincided with another controversial event.
Oh, yeah.
Vernon's marriage to 14-year-old Rachel Jones.
Right?
This was a move that raised eyebrows even within the context of their unconventional beliefs.
Yeah, the marriage was a lightning rod for controversy, even among those who had followed Vernon from Mount Carmel. It demonstrated his willingness to disregard societal norms and exert his authority in ways that challenged the limits of acceptable behavior, even within a community that already existed outside of mainstream society.
So this was a turning point not just in Vernon's personal life,
Right?
but also in his relationship with his followers.
Yeah.
It seems to mark a shift towards a more controlling and authoritarian leadership style.
Yes, and this new dynamic was further solidified when Vernon and his followers relocated to this more isolated location near Palestine, Texas.
Oh, wow.
They embraced a life of hardship enduring Spartan living conditions and strict discipline as a test of their faith and loyalty.
It's almost unimaginable to comprehend that level of devotion.
Wow,
To
right.
willingly follow someone into such a demanding and isolated existence.
Right.
What was it about Vernon that inspired such unwavering allegiance?
I think it was a combination of factors.
Okay.
Vernon possessed this undeniable charisma,
Yeah.
like an ability to connect with people on this deeply personal level and inspire a sense of purpose and belonging.
Yeah.
He also skillfully wove these biblical interpretations and prophetic pronouncements into his teachings, creating a narrative that resonated with those seeking meaning and certainty in a world they perceived as increasingly chaotic and hostile.
And it was during this period of isolation and intense spiritual focus that Vernon Howell underwent a profound transformation.
Yeah.
He traveled to Israel, experienced a vision in Jerusalem, consumed a biblical scroll,
Wow.
and emerged with a new name and a radical declaration.
He was no longer Vernon Howell,
He was now David Koresh.
the final Messiah.
Wow.
This name change and self-proclamation as the Lamb of God mentioned in the book of Revelation were more than just symbolic gestures.
Right.
They represented this fundamental shift in Koresh's self-perception and his role within the group.
Right.
He wasn't just a leader or interpreter of prophecy anymore.
Yeah.
He was now the divinely appointed figure destined to usher in the apocalypse and lead his followers to salvation.
This must have sent shockwaves through his community.
The reactions were mixed.
Really?
Some embraced Koresh's messianic claims with even greater fervor,
Okay.
seeing it as confirmation of their faith and the righteousness of their cause.
Yeah.
Others, however, began to question his authority and express doubts about his increasingly unorthodox teachings and demands.
Wow. So this growing internal dissent added another layer of complexity to the dynamics at Mount Carmel.
Definitely, as Koresh sought to consolidate his power and silence any opposition to his rule.
But Koresh's ambitions extended beyond his immediate followers.
Right.
He was determined to reclaim Mount Carmel, the place where his journey had begun,
Yeah.
and the symbolic center of his movement.
Right.
This desire set him on a collision course with George Roden, who still controlled the property.
Totally. And saw Koresh as a threat to his legacy.
The rivalry between Koresh and Roden took this bizarre and macabre turn.
I know.
When Koresh devised a plan to prove his prophetic powers by resurrecting a deceased follower. This plan, as outlandish as it sounds, underscored the depths of their conflict
Yeah.
and the lengths to which they were willing to go to assert their authority and discredit their opponent.
It's crazy.
So Koresh wasn't just playing a theological game.
Right.
He was maneuvering to legitimize his claim to leadership and reclaim a place of significance for his movement.
And Koresh, ever the strategist, tried to involve law enforcement in this plan.
Really?
He presented them with photographs of the exhumed body as evidence of desecration, hoping to provoke a response that would discredit Roden and solidify his own position.
Oh, wow.
However, the authorities, viewing this situation as an internal dispute within this fringe religious group, showed little interest in intervening.
This lack of response must have further fueled Koresh's sense of being persecuted by the outside world,
Yeah,
strengthening his us versus them mentality,
definitely.
and reinforcing his belief that he and his followers could only rely on themselves for protection and justice.
Absolutely. This sense of isolation and perceived hostility from the outside world was like a key element in Koresh's narrative.
Okay.
It allowed him to justify his increasingly authoritarian control over his followers and to paint any opposition, whether from within or outside the group, as part of this larger conspiracy against him and his divine mission.
So this brings us to a pivotal event, a nighttime raid on Mount Carmel that would forever alter the course of Koresh's life
Right.
and set the stage for the tragic events to come.
Driven by a desire to gather evidence against Roden and reclaim Mount Carmel,
Yeah.
Koresh and his armed followers embarked on this clandestine mission under the cover of darkness.
Oh, wow.
The atmosphere was thick with tension,
Yeah. Yeah.
a mix of fear, anticipation, and this unwavering faith in their leader's vision.
This wasn't just a group of religious zealots blindly following a charismatic leader.
Right.
These were individuals who believed they were engaged in this spiritual battle,
Oh.
fighting against forces they perceived as evil and determined to defend their community.
Their way of life and their profit at any cost. The raid quickly descended into chaos.
Really?
They discovered that the body they had intended to photograph had been moved,
Oh, gosh.
further heightening their paranoia and confirming their suspicions of a plot against them.
Okay.
This escalated into a confrontation with George Roden,
Wow.
an exchange of gunfire that only ended with the arrival of law enforcement.
It's hard to imagine the intensity of that moment.
Yeah,
The darkness, the gunfire, the adrenaline surging through their veins.
I know.
It must have felt like the apocalyptic battle they had been preparing for was upon them.
This shootout had far-reaching consequences.
Yeah.
While Koresh was arrested for attempted murder, Roden, despite his erratic and violent behavior, remained free.
Really?
This perceived injustice reinforced Koresh's belief that he was locked in this spiritual war,
Wow.
a battle against forces that sought to silence him and his message.
This experience seems to have forged Koresh into the leader we associate with Waco. The man who faced off against the FBI, who instilled unwavering loyalty in his followers,
Right.
and who ultimately led them to their tragic demise.
The events of that night had a profound impact on Koresh and his followers.
Okay.
Their willingness to face arrest and potential death in defense of their leader and their beliefs
Yeah.
demonstrated the depth of their commitment and foreshadowed the dangerous path they were on.
Right.
The lines between faith and fanaticism blurred as Koresh emerged not just as a spiritual leader, but as a figure who commanded absolute obedience
Wow.
and instilled this siege mentality within his community.
So we're left with this image of David Koresh, no longer just a religious seeker, but a leader forged in the fires of conflict, deeply suspicious of the outside world, and prepared to defend his community by any means necessary. This brings us back to Mount Carmel, where the stage is set for the final act of this tragedy.
Yeah. The shootout with George Roden wasn't just a turning point for Koresh personally. It also had a profound impact on his followers and the community as a whole. The fact that they were willing to engage in armed conflict to face arrest and potential death, it solidified their belief that they were living in a time of tribulation,
Oh, wow.
a period of intense persecution that would ultimately culminate in the apocalypse they had been preparing for.
And remember those guns that Koresh's followers acquired during the shootout?
Oh, yeah.
They became more than just weapons. They became symbols of their defiance, their willingness to resist what they perceived as a hostile and encroaching government.
Exactly. Koresh skillfully wove this sense of persecution into his teachings, further solidifying his control over the community. He preached about the imminent battle with the forces of Babylon, a metaphorical representation of the corrupt outside world, and emphasized the need for his followers to be prepared to fight and die for their beliefs.
Life inside Mount Carmel became increasingly regimented and isolated. Koresh controlled every aspect of their lives, from their diet to their relationships, further separating them from mainstream society and reinforcing his absolute authority.
This isolation was key to Koresh's strategy. It allowed him to control the flow of information, to shape his followers' perceptions of the outside world, and to present himself as the sole protector and interpreter of God's will. This created an environment where questioning his authority or expressing doubts was seen as not only disloyal, but also dangerous a threat to the very survival of the community.
It's chilling to think about how Koresh used his charisma and his interpretations of biblical prophecy to manipulate his followers, essentially holding them captive to his own twisted vision of reality.
What's particularly tragic is that many of these individuals were drawn to Koresh's message because they were seeking meaning, purpose, and a sense of belonging. They believed they were joining a community that offered them spiritual enlightenment and salvation, not realizing that they were being drawn into a web of control and manipulation that would ultimately lead to their destruction.
So, as we approach the events of the Waco siege, we're left with this unsettling image of a community primed for conflict, led by a man convinced of his own divine mission and determined to resist any attempt to challenge his authority.
It's a recipe for disaster. The FBI alerted to Koresh's stockpile of weapons and, concerned about allegations of child abuse within the compound, initiated a siege that would last for 51 days and culminate in a deadly fire that claimed the lives of over 70 people, including Koresh and many of his followers.
It's a story that continues to haunt us, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked authority, the destructive power of fanaticism, and the tragic consequences that can unfold when faith and reason collide.
The legacy of David Koresh and the Waco siege is a complex one. It raises questions about the role of government in regulating religious groups, the boundaries of individual freedom, and the responsibility of society to protect its most vulnerable members.
As we conclude this deep dive, we're left with more questions than answers. How did Vernon Howell, a young man seeking solace in religion, transform into David Koresh, the self-proclaimed Messiah, who led his followers into a fiery inferno? What can we learn from this tragedy to prevent such events from happening again? And how can we as individuals and as a society foster a more nuanced understanding of faith and belief, one that embraces tolerance, critical thinking, and respect for human dignity? Those are questions worth pondering as we continue to grapple with the legacy of Waco and the enduring power of belief in shaping human behavior.
And perhaps the most important takeaway from this deep dive is a reminder that understanding the complexities of human belief, the motivations that drive individuals to extremes, and the warning signs of manipulation and control is crucial in navigating the challenges of a diverse and often volatile world.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the life of David Koresh and the events leading up to the Waco siege. It's a story that continues to fascinate and horrify us, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the enduring allure of belief. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.